first reached out to you, I was thinking it was, a couple weeks before the election. I was thinking we could do a kind of evergreen episode about Diddy or Epstein or the extent to which these so quote unquote conspiracy theories might be informing our political moment and what we can learn from them. And now I've seen you do a lot of really interesting coverage about the implications of various Trump appointees, again, relating to some of these. I don't know, how do you describe them? Um, Sub-political connections that are driving our politics. And
sure.
That is, it does feel very topical, frankly, and interesting. I do find myself, I want to confess to you that, apart from being on Rising, where there was a lot of audience interest in this stuff, I haven't personally dipped my toe into these waters, and I am a little apprehensive about it at the same, just because I don't know very much. I don't know enough to, hypothetically push back in the way that I would on a different subject area. But I know that that's a deficit of my own, and that's part of why I really want to talk to you, because you're so knowledgeable and you have such a wealth of knowledge over all of these different issue areas. So maybe the best thing I should do is to ask you, what do you think is most useful for this bad faith audience who obviously listens to other shows, but here in this context hasn't gone very far down many of these rabbit holes?
Sure.
What do you think they should know? A relatively normie audience on these things.
Yeah, so I guess I would start off by saying that in general, the way I've sort of approached my whole career is trying to build common ground, generally speaking, between the anti-war left and the anti-war right, libertarians maybe, I guess, or people more of that bent, about common policies that tend to be bipartisan that I think are very Orwellian or very bad. And really benefit, more of the oligarch class, and sort of the idea that both political parties really ultimately serve the same masters and advance the same policy agendas, but their sales pitches for those agendas are different. And so there's a couple of those agendas that I focused on throughout my career, aside from the Epstein stuff, which ended up being more focused on sex blackmail and sort of the formation of intelligence agencies, both in the US and Israel, and sort of the overlaps there. But a lot of my work is focused on and it sort of has informed a lot of my coverage of the incoming Trump administration, sort of on, Peter Thiel, Palantir, and some of these, contractor companies that definitely play both sides, and which are advanced by both Democrats and Republicans, ultimately with the goal of sort of weaponizing the national security state against domestic dissent. And how I think what I worry about now with the incoming Trump administration is that they'll continue that same policy, even though they complained about it a lot under, Biden and the Biden and Harris administration, but will advance it under the guise of combating anti-Semitism, which has now been conflated with criticism of the Israeli state, for example. And I can talk a lot about Palantir and where they come from. They're really a rebrand of a neocon program from the Bush era. And I think that's kind of important to broach, because Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all of these PayPal mafia guys have tried to rebrand themselves as libertarians, and they're very clearly not that.
All right, so that was a perfect setup, and if I can use that as a cold open, you've been listening to Whitney Webb. She is a investigative journalist, formerly at Mint Press News, and also the author of One Nation Under Blackmail. Welcome to Bad Faith, Whitney.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
I mean, as I was saying, I have been eager to talk to you, a little overwhelmed at the prospect because of how your area of journalistic focus, your various areas of journalistic focus, very much overlap with my own blind spots. So I am using this as an opportunity to sort of presume that the audience has some of those blind spots as well, and to get you to fill this in. And I really do want you to feel free to guide this conversation to the places that you think a relatively normie audience should go, and what they need to know to start viewing some of this information maybe in a less conspiratorial light than it is viewed or as it's depicted in the mainstream, and to really understand what are the factors that are motivating so many of the political appointments that are being made today and the direction of our uniparty, more broadly speaking. So you brought up the fact that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are people who have branded themselves as libertarians, but this is a relatively new identification for them. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Peter Thiel has openly labeled himself a libertarian, and this has sort of been adopted by both his critics and his acolytes for really quite a long time, but it really doesn't make very much sense. For example, Peter Thiel is on video and also in his writings has referred to, for example, a free market competition as being for losers, and his definition of a capitalist is someone who accrues capital. So the most capitalist person is the person that's holding the most capital, or the richest person in the world. And he argues that the best way to do business is to build monopolies, find a niche, corner it, and build a monopoly. And when Peter Thiel has done that in his own business, he's done it in direct collaboration with three-letter agencies. He did that when he helped create PayPal, and of course later on when he created Palantir, which he did with the direct involvement of several neoconservative figures from the Bush administration, Richard Pearl, John Poindexter, and some others, and then of course became very involved with the CIA, particularly the CIA VC firm InQtel, in order to produce this company. Palantir, which was really an effort to repackage a Bush era, a post 9/11 sort of Patriot Act era program that was housed within the Pentagon's DARPA called Total Information Awareness, which was widely criticized by the ACLU and a lot of these other, advocate groups, I guess you could say, in that era. Arguing it would eliminate individual privacy and basically gut the Constitution and a lot of the protections that American citizens have, which is arguably very true. But they realized that if they rebranded this as a private sector program and removed the public sector from it, that perhaps people wouldn't complain. And that was sort of the impetus for Palantir. And so Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, when they were creating it, went to John Poindexter, who is probably best known for being the highest ranking member of the Iran or of the Reagan administration to be prosecuted for his role in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was brought back for the Bush administration to run this program, and at the time was considered the godfather of modern surveillance, because part of what he did is part of his involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal was sort of set up some of these protocols and be involved in other scandals of that era, largely forgotten, that also involved surveilling domestic dissent in the United States. And so Palantir was really sort of an effort to privatize that. And, if it's a private company, it doesn't have to necessarily follow all the rules that it would have to if it was a public sector program. So the decision was made to privatize it. And there was also another DARPA era program that was related to total information awareness that was called LifeLog, which bears a lot of similarities to Facebook, which was actually launched the same day that LifeLog was shut down, in the same era of these DARPA programs being sort of shut down and then relaunched as private sector versions. And then Peter Thiel becomes intimately involved in creating early Facebook and shaping it, and remained on its board for a very long time, and shaped a lot of its policies, including its involvement, for example, in unconstitutional surveillance, where Facebook collaborated along with a lot of other large Silicon Valley companies with the NSA to surveil Americans, for example. And of course, Palantir scrapes all of that data that's on Facebook and social media and uses that to regularly profile people, including Americans, and has been used in efforts to, develop predictive policing, which is really pre-crime. And Palantir was openly testing that in minority communities in New Orleans and some other parts of the United States, and trying to develop basically a way to outsource law enforcement and a lot of national security policy, also domestically, basically have an AI algorithm run it. And unfortunately, we're sort of at a point where there's probably going to be efforts, most likely under the incoming Trump administration, under the guise of increasing government efficiency, to put AI in increasingly powerful roles, in government, including in law enforcement and other things. And Palantir is a harbinger of that. And I think, if you look at its history, its CIA involvement, people like Peter Thiel and what this program has actually done and what it has, how it has developed, It's very concerning. So, like in the COVID era too, Palantir was granted pretty much unfettered access to American health data and also to all the NHS health data in Britain on government contracts. And there's really been really no meaningful oversight of what Palantir does with that, with people's health data and their history of targeting minorities in particular, and also labeling Americans subversives for intelligence agencies based on Americans' online activity. This is a very troubling company. It's very nothing about it is libertarian or civil liberty minded at all, despite the fact that Peter Thiel frames himself that way. They're also very willing collaborators of this proliferation of AI weapons. You can see that with their intimate involvement in the genocide in Gaza going on right now, and how they've facilitated a lot of these AI kill lists and things that have been used by the IDF that are not transparent, but are being used to decide if people live or die based on, an AI algorithm deciding how close they're affiliated with an alleged Hamas member.
If they're on the same cell phone plan, all of that kind of thing that we covered back months ago. Right.